Anything to say about 1 Corinthians chapter 8? No? No? Okay. So, in this section, starting in verse 1, I'm going to say right off the bat, I disagree with the Bible. Like, wow, people broke the necks. Not Paul, but whoever broke up the chapters. I disagree with how they broke up the chapters here. I think the first section of chapter 9 should be possibly an extension on chapter 8. It really is stuck together there. So we'll see, actually, most of chapter 9, but you couldn't have a chapter in Corinthians that's 4 pages long. So it is broken up appropriately. But we need to remember that we put the chapters in. This is one in particular that, we need to emphasize that. Paul didn't put the chapters in. Jesus didn't put the chapters in. Guys who translate the Bible did us a really good, helpful thing by breaking this up for us in a way that makes it easier for us to read, and point to specific verses. But that kind of confuses this section a little bit. So I think I'm reading out of an LSB this week, or CSB or something, but it's not a BSB or NASB, but it's close. So it might be a little worded different, but that's okay. 1 Corinthians 9, verse 1. Am I not free? Am I not an apostle? Have I not seen Jesus, our Lord? Are you not my work in the Lord? If to others I'm not an apostle, at least I am to you, for you're the seal of my apostleship in the Lord. My defense to those who examine me is this. This section is a defense of what happened above. Up above in verse 8, or chapter 8, we see the conversation about meat sacrificed to idols. Weaker, stronger brother is what we glean out of that mostly, but his specific topic that he's talking about is some people are really, really opposed to eating meat sacrificed to idols. It is against their conscience, therefore, they could be sinning in doing so. Whereas other people realize that every single idol that's out there is just a piece of rock or metal or wood, and that it has nothing behind it, possibly other than a demon who does, some fun, fancy stuff to get people to believe in it. So it is not anything to worry about. What we see here in verse 3 is Paul's defense, as he called it, which means that the question that is brought up, which is how we're going through most of Paul's epistles, is he's responding to questions or comments that he got in letters or different ones people came and talked to him. He's responding to things, but he never writes in there the question, colon, and then his answer to it. He just is talking about stuff going on. So we don't see in this, but we can glean from it, as we do for the rest of all his topics, that there's probably the question in there of, why is Paul eating meat sacrificed to idols? And specifically, I think we can get there because of the length and substance in his defense. And he specifically calls it his defense. I'm not adding that. That is, his wording. So what it looks like here is Paul's really doubling down on what he said in chapter 8 in his reasons why it's okay to eat meat. Now, he ended with chapter 8 saying, therefore, if food causes my brother to stumble, he says some outrageous stuff here, I will never eat meat again, ever, so it will not cause my brother to stumble. From that last verse, going into the first verse of chapter 9, he starts establishing his authority. Now, Paul does this a couple times through the different epistles, where he'll list, all the stuff that he's gone through and reasons why, he talks about Damascus, the road to Damascus, and stuff like that. He brings up multiple times in his teaching why he is someone worth listening to, which makes sense because especially in these big population hubs, all kinds of people are traveling through trying to make a buck, listen to my story, I got good things to tell you, pay me for my troubles kind of thing. So he needs to make a defense for himself, which is fine and understandable. And that's what he's doing here. He's defending himself on a topic that, and he gets kind of upset a little bit and justifying himself. So let's read it with that in mind now. I'm going to start back at verse 1, knowing verse 3 is in there. Am I not free? Am I not an apostle? Have I not seen Jesus, our Lord? Are you not my work in the Lord? If to others I am not an apostle, at least I am to you, for you are the seal of my apostleship. My defense to those who examine me is this: do we not have authority to eat and drink? Do we not have authority to take a believing wife, even as the rest of the apostles and the brothers of the Lord and Cephas? Aside there, Jesus had brothers. Verse 6. Or do only Barnabas and I not have the authority to refrain from working? Who at any time serves as a soldier at his own expense? Who plants a vineyard and does not consume the fruit of it? Or who shepherds a flock and does not consume the milk of the flock? Am I speaking these things according to human judgment? Or does not the law also say these things? Verse 9. For it is written in the law of Moses, you shall not muzzle the ox while it is threshing. Is God merely concerned about the oxen? Or is he speaking altogether for our sake? Yes, for our sake it was written, because the plowman ought to plow in hope, and the thresher to thresh in hope of sharing the crops. If we sowed spiritual things to you, is it too much if we reap material things? If others share in this authority over you, do we not more? Nevertheless, we did not use this authority, but we endured all things so that we will cause no hindrance to the gospel of Christ. We'll stop there for now. That's the interesting thing about this. The layout of this Bible is different, so there's no paragraph breakups. So it's kind of throwing me off. It's typically you just stop at the paragraph breakups. So I don't know where you guys are on those. So Paul goes into this defense of, you got to trust me, because I'm the only one in this group of people here who's seen the Lord face to face, he mentions. And then he mentions some of the other apostles and things that they're allowed to do, some of the other teachers. And he's almost being held to a different standard. And he's defending himself, saying, why? Why am I held to this different standard? Now, he goes into explaining that he's the only one, and it's mentioned, he's a tent maker in other passages and stuff. He's the only one who has to work, like our pastors, to defend him, to supply his finances. Which means, if he's teaching a lot, he's not working a lot. He's not making much money. And then we go back to chapter 8, where the meat sacrifice temples was cheaper. So going backwards through all this, we know Paul doesn't have much money. In another chapter, he asked somebody to bring his coat because he left his coat behind. Obviously, he doesn't have enough money to buy a new coat. So the guy's low on funds because he's working for the Lord. He's sacrificing himself, his time to the Lord. So, logically, he gets the meat that's on sale. But somebody who doesn't understand grace the best yet, which is perfectly fine, everybody's on their own trail with all that, saw him buying meat at the temple, some idol temple. And now we're back to this situation where he's explaining in self-defense, but also for our encouragement, knowing that just because we think something is a sin doesn't mean it is a sin. And we can get there if we search out the scriptures and be good Bereans. What was the other thing? So we'll go back to verse 9. For it is written in the law of Moses, you shall not muzzle the oxen while it is threshing. This section, 9 to 13, is basically the chapter, but if you look up a sermon on this chapter, it's going to be a pastor who's paid by the church using this to explain why it's okay that he gets paid by the church, which is fine. That is definitely something you can glean out of this. But it's not the topic. It's not what Paul is doing. But it is such a well-known thing that a pastor can get paid by the church, that because it's so well-known, he can use that as a frame of reference to start off, a jumping point, to get to the rest of his conversation. But that's not the point he's making. He's making the point that, yes, it's a known thing and that's okay. Peter and the other disciples, they all get paid by the churches, but they were, all still in Jerusalem. They all get paid. So they didn't have to deal with this same kind of situation. The people in Jerusalem, when they were speaking to the Jews and stuff, the Jews already knew that That's how the people in the temple lived. That's how the Levites lived, by all the donation or the offerings brought to the temple. So that wasn't an issue at all for the people, the Jewish people. But Paul, writing to people in Corinth, isn't talking to those same kind of people. He's talking to people who regularly get tricked into paying people who walked in to tell some great new news. People on their little trail to make some money. So it's all convoluted. Because Paul knows that there's these sketchy people out there who just try to steal money from people, he didn't take any money from the church. He said, I'll work on my own, which honestly, obviously I agree with that because I was brought up in this church where we don't pay the pastors. But it completely depends on who you're talking to. Just like we saw in chapter 8. It completely depends if it's okay to eat this meat based on who you're talking to. And we need to keep in mind that what we think is not always the best for the context of who we're talking to. Not everybody's ready for the solid meat. A lot of people need the milk of the word. Understanding who you're talking to is exactly what he's talking about in 8 and 9. He knows this group very well. He spent years with them. So he's writing back to them, and he's establishing, I'm allowed to say these things and do these things because I know what I'm talking about. Trust me. He's saying, trust me. Verse 10. Or is he speaking altogether for our sake? Yes, it's for our sake it is written, because the plowman ought to plow in hope, and the thresher thresh in hope of sharing the crops. If we sow spiritual things in you, is it too much? We reap material things. If others share this authority over you, do we not even more? So he's saying, if others share this authority over you, as if there are people who they pay to teach them, he says, do we not even more? Nevertheless, we did not use this authority, but we endured all things so that we will cause no hindrance to the gospel of Christ. So he did not accept that because, verse 13 of chapter 8, therefore, if it caused my brother to stumble, change the words a little bit, I will never receive money again. It's the same argument. Chapter 8 is part of chapter 9. Okay? If you're doing something that makes somebody else stumble, stop. You're wrong. Even if you're allowed to do it, you're wrong because you're causing somebody else to stumble. This implies that we really, really know who we're talking to before we get into any kind of questionable topics. This implies discipleship, in-depth discipleship. Because if you're not really at that level with the person who you're talking to, and then you do something questionable, they might not feel comfortable enough to bring it up to you. But because Paul is who he is, because Paul spent the time that he spent talking to these people, he knows them, and they know him. So he can reference this almost in jest of like, guys, you know me. You know what I'm talking about. I know I'm saying the same thing over and over again, but we need to get that point across because chapter 8 gets so lost with the weaker and stronger brother, and it ignores the parts that both of them play. The weaker brother needs to be able to speak up, and the stronger brother needs to be able to be quiet and listen. And that's what Paul's doing here. He's explaining the importance of all of that. Where did we end? We'll start at 12 there. If others share this authority over you, do we not more? Nevertheless, we did not use this authority, but we endured all things, so that we will cause no hindrance to the gospel of Christ. Do you not know those who perform sacrifice services eat the food of the temple, and those who attend regularly to the altar have share from the altar? So, verse 14. So also the Lord directed those people, those who proclaim the gospel, to get their living from the gospel. Now, this is something that the disciples or the apostles know, and he's just letting them in on this. I'll read it again. So also the Lord directed those who proclaim the gospel to get their living from the gospel. And it's okay if you get paid by the people you're teaching. That's okay. Verse 15. But I have used none of these things. And I think we'll stop on this verse here. So this will be the last one. And I am not writing these things so that it will be done so in my case, for it be better for me to die than to have anyone make my boast an empty one. He knows the importance of what he's doing. He knows that he's got to do some things that people won't agree with, like eating meat sacrificed to idols, to get the job done. Because he's got to eat. But he's not reaching to get money from these people because he knows that will shut them down. That he can lose even just one person who's like, oh, he's just here to get money. He's not here to teach the truth. We like to come and listen, so he knows he can get us over and over, getting money from us. He knows the risk, and he's willing to risk that, first of all. But sometimes that comes with sacrifices we have to make in our lives. He wasn't able to go to pay for the best meats, the freshest foods or whatever. There were sacrifices he had to make. He was low on funds because of his ministry. And that was perfectly fine with him because he knew the importance of what he was doing. And we want full comfort, and we'll shut out people instead of sacrificing, stuff that we like. The likelihood of, I'll just say myself, wanting to make a fully vegan meal, because someone's coming over as vegan, like that would be a battle I have. Like, I can't eat meat but that wouldn't have been a thought in Paul's mind. He would never eat meat again if it means that he has the ability to speak to this person now. And I mean, that's obviously he's referencing that's where we need to be. And that's where we need to establish. And that's why we saw chapter 8 first. Because he had to explain, before he could explain this, he had to explain the weaker and stronger brother. He had to explain that there's some things that you think might be wrong but aren't yet. They aren't wrong, not yet. And it depends on where you're at the time. So yeah, that section I believe ties better into chapter 8. We really get lost with these numbers in our Bibles sometimes, even to the point of Gary's teaching a chapter and then I'm teaching a chapter, and we specifically break it up based on those numbers, but they flow into each other so much that we got to be really careful where we're breaking these up, because then if you do break it up in the wrong spot, this chapter just becomes you need to pay your pastor, and that's the end of it. And it's not what it's saying. It's not what it's saying at all. So, any questions or comments?
Just how different versions say different words. We talked about it earlier.
Yeah.
Where yours says authority, mine says right. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking, how many times a year I had the right to do this, I had the right to do this. Paul's saying, I guess I had the right, the authority to do this, but I choose not to. Mm-hmm. Because of humility or whatever you want to say for the sake of the gospel. We claim rights all the time. That's a shame. I mean, I don't know if it's just this generation that we claim that. We have the right to be to do it. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It's not that, I have the ability to eat meat offered, I have the right to do that.
Yeah.
And we claim it as, I have the right. Where the Bible talks about Christ as a man of no reputation, that's what I strive to be. That's what we all should strive to be. We have rights, but again, for the gospel's sake, we should give up that right. Yeah. I mean, I don't know where right comes from, but
I mean, Americans, we do that a lot because the Bill of Rights. It's ingrained in us from an early age, elementary school, where we're going through our historical documents, and we have rights, inalienable rights endowed by our Creator. So it's stuck in us. I think. I mean, I can't speak for other cultures, but as an American, it sounds like that. But I wish I knew that word was different. I would have amplified that a little bit. But yeah, that really hits it home, because the idea of rights as Americans, we really get stuck on our rights. And Paul's like, your rights mean nothing when it comes to the gospel. Set aside every right you think you have if it means one more person can hear the gospel. So, yeah, thank you. Yes,
Accept money from different churches. Mm-hmm. but not the Corinthians, because of their immaturity. And they, I mean, you get further in, you see how much they put big names up on the screen, and they had a very difficult time. But I was also thinking, it's really interesting that we support missions, so that when missionaries go into new areas, they're obviously not going in there for their money. You know, they are free to serve the people that they're trying to reach.
I think this passage in the beginning here shows that I think the Corinthians really accepted his authority. And so I think that this is a picture to the Jewish believers in the group who, you remember, this is probably, Corinth is Greek, is Roman, and is Jewish, more than any. And, the debauchery of, how they eat custom wives at different tables, as you'll see in a couple of chapters ahead, that was a norm. But now, so if you're the Jewish guy and, you see Paul coming in, there was no, Mount Sinai that these guys were, seeing. And if there was, they may not have responded well again either. But, so that's why I think he says, am I not free? Am I not an apostle? Well, yeah. Have I not seen the Lord? Yes. Are you not my work in the Lord? Yes. If I am not an apostle to others, referring to those who are not understanding. So I'm going to defend him a little bit, just to get that perspective. Who is this guy? He's talking about God, but he's doing all this. He can't be an apostle. Yeah. Based on their math, it didn't work. So, he's leaning into that for sure. He even uses not just the example of the priest, but he reaches back to Deuteronomy with the ox illustration. He casts a wide net, to get all of this. It's not just the tradition, or the teaching, and then further probably more tradition of the priest, but all the way back to Deuteronomy. He's explaining this. So he's clearly reaching out to the Jewish people here. And then I think he's going to turn the page in dealing with the Lord's Supper with the Romans and the Greeks that are there. So yeah, I think that's where he's coming from, because he actually says, if I am not an apostle to others, at least I am to you. So they did have a relationship with him. They did see him because they saw all the great things he did. They knew he was of God. They saw with their own eyes, they heard with their own ears. And they were probably, many of them living this. So they got to see it. So he's, putting himself out there, all that I have done, I really am a God.
There's two things there. That's one of them. The other one was because of the amount of time he's been out of Corinth now, there is the very high likelihood that there are people in the church who have never seen Paul before. And they're, maybe somebody's, the next step is maybe somebody's eating meat sacrificed to idols, and they're like, well, Paul said it was okay. And they're like, well, who's Paul? Why are we listening to that guy? He's not even here. So there's that side of it too. This could be new believers he's addressing a little bit, trying to amplify, this is who I am. It's coming from my mouth, not just hearsay. So that's the one side, that and the other side. But both are the same kind of thing. But yeah. Anybody else? No? Aaron, could you close in prayer?